Hi, welcome back to my FTL ship coloring tutorials. This one's number 3. It's also like my third or fourth go at recording this. 2 times people have come in. Once I forgot to use headphones, so I didn't record any sound. And the last one, I had notifications popping up all over the place. You know, let's hope this one, we'll get to the end of it this time. So, I'm going to take through the main body of colouring here, um, and hopefully get more familiar with the GIMP tools. I've got some pre-prepared examples, Blue Peter examples we call them in the UK. Just splitting out the layers, different colourings, adding transparency to one layer. So I've done that by colouring to the alpha, which is the actual button, like the drop-down menu select, rather than a layer mask, using an image to provide the colouring. And this one I've mapped to gradient. I think the first step is normally always splitting out the image into different layers. So I'm going to go through a couple of them. I'm not going to do them all because it just takes a lot of time and I don't think it's valuable. Once you know what you're supposed to do, you can just crack on and practice. So in this one you can see there's lots of different layers: outline, color strips, grate, pilot eyes. So I'm going to duplicate this and call this master and just hide it. So we've always got something we can refer back to. And then I'm going to add in a black layer and a white layer just to help see different portions of the image. So here we've got our foreground and background colors. I'm going to default that by pressing D, and then I'm going to press Shift B for the bucket fill tool. I'm coloring the whole selection, so hit. We've got our black layer, and if I hit X, that switches between these two. Okay, so I'm going to start by getting the outline, and this is almost always going to be the top layer. So I'm going to use the color selecting tool, which hotkey is Shift O, and probably want the threshold about 15. Somewhere around there is pretty standard. Zoom in, make sure you're on the correct layer. Select the color. I'm just going to copy and paste it. Control C, Control V. Okay, so that looks right. So let's do the color strips next. So I'm going to do this, or this is essentially the principle moving forward. You can either select the color in the image. If you increase the threshold, you select more of the color, but when the colors are quite similar, you select other elements as well. So if we keep that relatively small, if you hit Shift and click, you'll add to selection area. If you hold Control, you'll remove from selection area. So you can go through and select all the kind of peach like that. Or if you go to the outline and use the fuzzy tool, so it's basically the same as the color selector, but only does it in a small region. Because this outline, there's no color in these regions, it will just select that whole region by using this rather than the color selecting tool. So because I'm in the outline there, I can select all the elements that I want to, and then I can go back to my Kestrel image and copy it out of that. So I've got my selection there. If I come back here, Control C, Control V, we've got the color stripes, and that's the main thing we're after. So there's normally more than one way to achieve the results you want, and it's just how you go about it. Like these engines, I'm not going to do all the engines, but it's a bit of a pain at times on the Castrol. Because if we zoom in, what you'll find is they're not, it's all grey and the ship's grey. So if we use color select, we'll be able to get some of them, if we're on the right layer that is. But if we select that one, you can see it starts selecting large parts of the image as well. Now the other thing you can do, you could get the rectangle tool and then draw a rectangle around it or an ellipsis and then select within that. I would default back to using the fuzzy tool and using the outline layer. And you can select much bigger areas like that. Now I'm not going to do all of this, it's more just to give you the idea of what I'm doing. I mean, I've previously split them out for that in specific purpose because it just takes it's a lot of time. And you'll find what works for you, what doesn't work for you. You might come up with a different method, but this is just what I use. So once you've got everything split, you might have something like this. So we've got just a bunch of different things, like engines, I'll have you off, step insets, panels. In this example, I've colored it blue and green, but we can pick whatever we want really. So here, if we select our, what we're going to call our base image, in colors, colorize, let's go pink on a preview. So we've got a pink ship now. That's very pink. Let's go blue. So if you go all the way to dark or light, it doesn't work so well because I don't have any shading. So you want something a bit more mid-tone. There, light green. And then you can just pick the layers and do the same kind of thing. And this is kind of your basic recoloring. So we might say that these, we want a very dark green. And then we might come up to the stripes and say, again, I quite like vivid colors. Might say what want that pretty orange. So there we go. We've got our nice ship coloring. And that would function well like that. So the next step would be this. So these shaded areas are just more accented. And I've done that by adding a transparency layer, which is this one. So that's your colorized ship, and then that's the transparency on top of it. So let's go over how to do that. So let's just take a copy of our master image. So what essentially we want to be adding transparency to the white. I mean, if we show you how to do that through the coloring to alpha rather than the mask, it does say it in the thing. Works best with white. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase the contrast on this and decrease the brightness. I'm also going to desaturate it so it's basically all black and white. Color to alpha. So that's your standard colorized, and then this is with essentially enhanced shading, which I think looks pretty nifty. So you can use that same technique um, to apply to any color underneath. So we've got, we'll just call this color. So we've got a new layer, we've got it underneath. What I'm going to do is color that a color, a color. Right. Let's go to the greens palette and pick that green. I'm going to color the whole thing, that whole layer green. So if I right click, alpha to selection selects round kind of any point there's image, if you will. It's not, that's a pretty poor explanation of it, but it's, you know, good enough. I want to invert that selection. Then I'm just going to cut that away. So if we remove the transparency, all you've got is a block color. So the lines are adding color, the previous shading is adding depth. But when we add the transparency, we get more depth. So that works for just a block color. It works for a gradient as well. So I hotkeyed it with G. Let's pick a. Well, let's pick tropical colors. So we've got our gradient there. We're just going to do the alpha selection, invert it, Control I, cut it away, Control X, and then we've got our rainbow ship. So, yeah, so what I've got here is a planet image, which is how I've done this one. So we copy that image, Control C, and I'm just going to add it to a new layer. As you can see, that's probably not big enough as it is. And the other thing to note is shading. So we have our darkness on the top of the ship, and this has it at the right hand side, so we probably want to change that. And it's also too small. So how do we fix these things? So layer, scale layer, and we're going to double the size of that to 760. If you choose, it's best to pick sensible integers so it can transpolate, interpolate it well. So if I picked a size 1.5 times the size, it might not have looked the same. And I want to change where the shading is going. So I'm going to go Shift R, and it gives the rotate tool. So we can just rotate that around. I'm going to do the same thing as before. So alpha to selection, back to this layer, Control I, Control X. And that looks quite good as well, like that. So there's pretty much anything you can do, you can make it look nice. So that looks pretty good. That looks pretty good. They're just different approaches. So this last one, this is what I do this on a lot of my ships. It is mapping the gradient and mapping to palette. So if we make a copy of this again, we'll come up. So if I hit G, these are all the gradients. And if I come here, these are all the palettes. So if we go to color, map, and just hover over these, so what it does is it recolors the image using whatever your active gradient or active palette is. So that was deep sea. Deep sea. So we go color, map, gradient, there. It's not quite the same, but it's very similar. Ah, you know what? I did some transformations to that first, but never mind. And if we add that, adds more depth again. So that looks pretty good. We can just undo it. Let's map to a palette now. Okay, well, these colors in the palette won't all be all the colors in the palette. So you see all of them, there's quite a lot of yellows in this. So we color, map, palette. We got that nice coloring. So along with this, you can do more transformations. Invert, not bad. Value invert. So essentially they're doing just slightly different things. So invert, um, essentially is the negative image, whereas value invert keeps the brightness the same but changes the color. So I've done some rebel ships recently, and what I did was this trouble colors gradient, I mapped that, and then I value inverted it. So for this, it looks quite good, but it's just a bit dark for this ship. There's not enough lightness. Um, but even that in itself looks quite good. And you can just play around until you get whatever effect you want. And you can make your own palettes, and you can make your own gradients. Like that's really cool. So if you alpha to white, you probably keep a lot of that shading. Yeah, so you keep a lot of the shading in the yellow, which is really good. So yeah, we won't just delete that there. So if we add this one, and then map the palette, which was the cold fire, that looks pretty neat. And that's kind of the basics of it. In the next video, I'll kind of do a worked example pretty quickly, but same kind of thing. Um, so yeah, hopefully this has been helpful. Um, Again, I've not really used layer masks at all, um, but I'm fine with that. There are plenty of GIMP tutorials out there if you really want to get into that kind of thing. So, good colouring, and hopefully see you on the last video.